was also good. You know, so the idea of RNOx was also very good. You know, overall, you know, the balanced growth doctrine, you know, looked at is basically on the part of development and the pattern of investment, because what that means is that every economy requires investment for the economy to grow. If you invest heavily in an economy, you know, like I said, in working institutions, because when you invest heavily in economies where the institutions are very weak, obviously your investment might not yield the results that are required. But if the institutions are all in place, the investments will yield the results because, you know, there'll be rule of law, and all the component parts of the economy will fall in place. So for development to take place, there must be investment. And investment, like we know in economics, is equal to savings. And when there's good investment, you know, productivity will be gingered. And when productivity is gingered, what happens? You produce enough for the market, and the market will, demand will increase. And when demand increases, there'll be an equivalent amount of supply to meet up with the demand. So in the long run, you see there'll be a balance, there'll be an equilibrium in the economy, because the economy produces what it needs, and, you know, there's adequate demand for the productivity, and income will rise. And rising income makes, you know, an economy that it makes a working economy. You know, when people earn, they buy, and when they buy, they produce. So that's how the economy works. So these are component parts of part of development must match the pattern of investment. So that's what the balanced growth doctrine is, you know, looks at. Then the other side of it, the unbalanced growth theory, you know, emphasizes that the sectors must be looked at, you know, component parts of the sector, investment in the component parts of the sectors, you know, should be looked at independently. If you want to invest, you pick up a sector that, you know, appeals to the economy, that most probably appeals to the economy, because when I say the word economy, I'm looking at the system in general, that the system might require basic infrastructure, for example. So for a developing country like Nigeria, for example, if you don't have basic infrastructure, for goodness sake, how will you produce? You can't produce. You can't produce where the cost of productivity is very high. Or even if you produce, it's not competitive. You know, so at the end of the day, what do you get? Your investment will be low, and with low investment, you know, it means basically that productivity will be very low as well. And when productivity is low, income will be low. So the balanced growth theory says pick those sectors that are very, very relevant to the system first. Invest heavily in those sectors. You know, for example, power infrastructure. You know, when you invest in power, you will not have you know, a cheap electricity, so to speak, to produce. Invest in other infrastructure like transportation, you know, education, basically for education and health, so that your citizens will be healthy and they will, you know, have good human development, indices, and life will be very good for them. So when you have healthy citizens, good human capital, good investment in basic infrastructure, your system will be productive. So that's what the unbalanced growth theory is saying. Instead of picking all the sectors at the same time, pick one sector at a time, invest in that sector, improve heavily on that sector, and when that sector is fully, you know, working at optimum, so to speak, you can use resources, or you know, or generated from such sectors to invest in other relevant sectors that can drive the economy. So that's what the unbalanced growth theory is all about. And one of the major proponents of unbalanced growth theory is Hirschman, you know, Albert Hirschman. Albert Hirschman is one of those that came up with theories that and analytical principles that matched what, you know, unbalanced growth theory is all about. So I will advise you guys to probably look into some of these, you know, readings and going to read some, because there are so many texts that wrote very important things about balanced and unbound growth. So you can look into some of them in your text and search online for articles and stuff to read about it. So let's look at Rodin's big push theory. Rodin's big push theory, like we said earlier, Rodin is one of the early proponents of the balanced growth theory. The balanced growth theory Rodin proposed is that, for you to grow an Hello? Hello? Can
You
someone
can go
hear
ahead,
me?
sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, please. Yeah, I'm sorry for the intermittent break, and please, will just bear with me. We're just going to definitely try to work it out until, you know, we're done. So I'm sorry about that. Okay, so let's see. Just going to take it this way. Okay, so yeah, we are looking at Rodin's big push theory and some of the indivisibilities he looked at, that obviously necessitates why the big push is necessary. So let's one by one. So the first one is the indivisibility in the production function. When you look at the production function, like we said earlier, is something that is holistic. You need labor, you need capital, you need other factors of production necessary to, you produce goods in an economy. So there are two basic factors that you looked at: the supply of overhead capital. And when you look at this overhead capital that is needed to ginger an economy for power production, for transport, for communications, housing, you know, and wage investments, these things require huge wage investment and long-term capital investment. So Rodin's theory is that for you to balance, for you to come up with a balanced economic growth in an economy, you need to invest heavily in these areas. And these investments require huge capital outlay, which obviously will, you know, pumping heavy capital in specific areas and all the areas at the same time is kind of heavy for any system and require very huge wage, investment, because you definitely have to pay all the workers that will be in all these different sectors at the same time. So because of this, there is need for you to have. Rodan is saying that because of, you cannot treat any of these sectors in isolation. You cannot really divide, you know those sectors as, this sector is specific for the economy, this one is specific. These things are holistic. You can't run a transport system that is effective without having power. You can't run a communication system that is effective in any country without having power. You can't run a housing project that is comfortable without having power. So all these sectors are holistic. So Rodan is saying that because they are holistic in nature, they have to, you can't, if you want to carry all of them at the same time, you have to invest heavily, especially in wage, because you have to pay workers that will propel these sectors. So that's one aspect. So the social overhead cost, overhead cost of running a balanced system is huge, and at the same time, but if an economy is able to invest heavily in this area, it definitely the economy will become productive in the long run. So Rodin's theory is like I said earlier, the balance theories are basically utopia in nature, and the level of realism is far fetched because it's difficult for an economy to just pump everyone. In the long run, too, as we go ahead in this learning, you'll be able to understand that in most developed countries today, at the level they are, they have more or less a balanced, growth system, you know, because for you to make an economy work reasonably well, the economy must embrace a balanced growth system. The systems can't work in isolation. You must carry all the systems along because one complements the other. Every sector of the economy works with another sector of the economy. So you must carry all along at the same time. But what uh, 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 um, economic theories were saying at this time is that even if you carry all at the same time, you need very huge investment. So that can only be possible in developed countries where they have huge capital outlay, where the capital to invest is readily available, and you know productivity is very high, high incomes, institutions are working. So, as we make progress, we'll definitely see some of the odds in the balanced growth theory and also the odds in the unbalanced growth theory. And you'll be able to judge for yourself as an economist, you know, what, which way is better, or which of these two theories make for better economic development analysis, as the case may be. So the social overhead capital actually, like Rodan is saying, that you must have very heavy social overhead capital for you to have direct productive investment. Because for investment, for you to invest heavily in an economy, you must require the resources, the capital resources and the both human and financial resources to propel the economy and carry along the economy in a holistic manner. So indivisibilities of production, because what that entails is that the production function is more or less a holistic function. You can't really carry anyone in isolation. You cannot say, okay, let us invest more in labor and less in, capital, because even if you pay even if you pay high wages, they need the basic infrastructure to operate. The individuals in an economy need infrastructure for them to perform at optimum. So you cannot treat social overhead costs will definitely be high. You cannot treat any aspect of the economy in isolation. So on this other side, the indivisibility of demand also talks about the complementarity of demand, because industries are interdependent. One industry, serves the other. For example, the agricultural industry, the agriculture provides the raw material for manufacturing. So you cannot, you need to, carry all along at the same time. That big push requires that if you invest in agriculture, you must also invest in manufacturing, because the products from the agricultural sector will definitely serve your manufacturing sector. So a balanced growth theory is better seen in developed countries, rather the so-called advanced nations. That's where you see a more balanced system as it is today. So where they have different sectors, working in unison, where the agricultural sector is producing enough, for the manufacturing sector to pick up resources, and individuals get well fed. At the same time, they work, healthy and be able to, generate the required resources for the economy to work. So the indivisibility of demand also looks at large scale investment, that look, you need to invest heavily in complementary and independent industries. Like this is like investing in several industries at the same time, because these industries, like we said, are interdependent. You cannot invest in an automobile industry without having a steel industry. For the automobile industry to work, you must have a steel industry. So your steel, if you produce steel, then you have automobile industry that will work. If you produce steel, you produce automobile. And if you produce automobile, transportation will be easier. So all the sectors are like complementary, and they complement each other, and they are interdependent. So when the agriculture is industrialized, obviously agriculture will produce the raw material like cotton that you can use to make clothes. The agriculture will produce the raw material for you to produce some consumables, and at the same time produce in other industries. So it's basically interdependent. So what Rodan is saying, in the book push is that, look, because of the indivisibility of demand, there is need for us to have a big push, to ginger economic growth. And when you ginger economic growth with a big push, that's like the balanced growth approach. Like I said earlier, the balanced growth approach is feasible today in developed countries, but sounds a little bit, difficult for underdeveloped countries or developing nations, so to speak, because developing nations do not have the resources. They don't have such capital to invest, even though they do, the institutions are not in place. The institutions are not working. And because of the failure of institutions, you know, the investment criteria is not it's not going to be fruitful in the long run, because even if the government intends to invest in so amount of money in social industry, at the end of the day, because of weak institutions, such investment will not take place, and accountability is almost zero, because where institutions are weak, the rule of law is not there, so accountability will be zero. So individuals do whatever they like and they get away with it. So that's the bane of development in so many developing countries. Developing countries are plagued with you know extractive institutions that do not work, institutions that exploit individuals instead of promoting the welfare of their citizens. And when you don't have institutions that promote welfare of citizens, definitely government programs will not work at optimum. You know, so that's what makes the Rodans idea of a big push will work, but as we see today, it can only be feasible in developed countries rather than developing countries. Such recommendations are more or less only feasible in countries with advanced systems where institutions are working, and it's very huge capital outlay, and the probability of investing heavily is high. So the third factor that Rodan thinks that necessitates a big push is indivisibility of supply of savings. Because of, like we said, high income elasticity of savings. When there is for you to invest heavily in an economy, you need to save heavily too. Because if an economy is producing, like we said, if you have a productive economy, individuals will earn high income. And when they earn high income, they save. When they save, what happens is that the money goes back into the system. Investors will use those savings as loans, provide other investment, and the economy, there'll be a cycle of prosperity. So in that case, for an economy to have good supply of savings, that economy needs very high investment. So productivity gingers investment, and investment gingers savings. So there is need for savings, because you cannot really say, okay, this savings is for social sector, and let us use these savings for so another sector. No, when people save, savings goes into the financial system, and that amount that is saved is invested back into the economy. So it is not indivisible. It's just like, it has to be holistic. So an economy that is working, that is productive, is an economy that saves. And for an economy to save, the economy must, an economy that saves will have higher investment, in return. So it's a cycle, of productivity, high investment, and high savings. Okay, so along the line, there are very heavy criticisms actually to the big push theory of Rodin. The criticisms, like we've seen, obviously, is that one is that the big push theory is beyond the capacity of underdeveloped countries. Like from the little analysis we've had, you can see that if you want to push an economy by investing heavily in all the sectors at the same time, you need very huge resources. And developing countries that are plagued with, unemployment, plagued with low investment, plagued with low income, I mean, where would the money come from to invest heavily in specific industries? Sorry, in the economy as a whole, you know. So the big push theory, at the time, probably might sound realistic, but it can only work like I said, in developed countries. In developed countries where the institutions and investments, the resources are in place, they can, ginger an economy with a big push. For example, in the United States, remember when during the COVID, during the COVID period, when there was a little bit of economic downturn, I mean, they started printing money. They started giving out money to workers, to cushion the effect of, not working during the COVID, to pay money to workers, increase their income, sustain their income ability. Such is to increase investment, because when you pay you money, you go and buy goods. If you buy goods, the producers will produce. So if the government does not do, sustain income, there'll be an economic downturn. So the big push theory works works in present-day developed countries. Is something that is beyond the capacity of underdeveloped countries in the real sense. So a big push is the, the government incentives that were given during COVID and during the financial recession. Those incentives are like big push. They're like big push. They're like it's things the government did to push the economy, ginger productivity, increase demand, individual demand, so that the economy will work. So big push sometimes, in the real sense, rather, looks like it's beyond the capacity of underdeveloped countries for the big push theory to function or effectively. So what, and the second one is that it neglects investment in the agriculture sector. The big push theory says you carry the sectors all at the same time. But like in Lewis theory in economics, the Lewis theory is that you must start in most societies start from the agrarian, sector, agrarian system where people rely more on agriculture. So if you want to grow an economy, you must first invest in agriculture. And when you invest in agriculture, especially for developing countries, if you invest in agriculture, agriculture will produce the necessary, raw material for manufacturing industry, and at the same time provide food for the citizens. So because when people are well fed, you can now start thinking about savings. You can now start thinking about, having money for, other things they want that will make up their life. So investing in agriculture is a major aspect for developing countries. There's no how you can come up with a development theory, for developing countries without first thinking about agriculture, because most developing countries need to feed. They need to have food on their table. If there's no food on the table, obviously there's no how they can develop, because, I mean, the average human being needs food for you to get out and think right. If you don't have food, you can't think well. So obviously agriculture is very important. And when you have a society that has enough food, definitely that society will start, would have accomplished the first step of growth and development, as the case may be. So what the critics are saying is that the big push theory, did not neglect, the investment the agriculture sector, did not encourage or give agriculture its rightful place in economic development. Because obviously agriculture should be the first step, like we said, to move society from the agrarian level into, industrialization, as the case may be. So any development theory that is silent on agricultural development, does not emphasize more a little bit on agriculture, is not basically proposed for developing countries. So that's what it is. Then the other aspect is that it ignores export and import substitutes. Obviously, in development, where countries are supposed to export, goods that they have comparative advantage. If a country should export what it has in the surplus and import those things that it needs. So the big push is saying that develop all the sectors at the same time, pump money into the sector at the same time, lay no emphasis on export and not much emphasis on import, which goes contrary to what we see in modern economic development. Modern economic growth is that you must export more, you must export more and import less for you to have good balance of payment and for the economy to to work, being in reasonable, for the economy to be in reasonable equilibrium, for the economy to have, you know, reasonable balance sheet. Because obviously the economy is like an individual. If you spend more than you earn, obviously you go borrowing. So if your export is less than your import, obviously you have to borrow to make up for the difference, because it's your amount of export, what you sell, and the difference between what you sell and what you buy is what makes your balance sheet. So if you export, you know, less and import more, it's like what we see in some developing countries today, where they export primary products and import finished products at higher cost. For example, you export a barrel of petroleum for $50, and the petroleum is used to manufacture goods that you import back for almost $1,000. So that's negative balance of payment. And at the end of the day, what happens to that economy? That economy will definitely not make progress. So that economy cannot develop. So the big push theory ignores the fact that you need to improve some sectors for export and excuse me, and promote import, to make up for the deficiencies in export. Excuse me. So another idea there is the big push. One of the other criticism is that when government or when the system, invests so much in specific sectors, it generates a lot of increases money supply, so to speak. Because when you invest so much, investment is like pumping money into the system. Because when you invest in a particular sector, what you're doing is you're pumping money into that sector. Excuse me, please. Pumping money to that sector, and in the long run, what that excess liquidity that is going into that sector will create inflation. And if not well planned, the inflation will spill over into the general economy, especially when the economy is not in equilibrium. When productivity, there's a shortfall in productivity in the consumer area. So if you pump so much money, at the end of the day, you create inflation. So there has to be a balance in supply, money supply, so to speak, so that the inflationary situation will not be so high. So then, like we said, there's another aspect that is very important there, the administrative and institutional problems, which we have highlighted a couple of them. Administratively, obviously, there is no how you can push a system to work where the institution is not fully effective, where all the development parameters are not fully in place. You'll agree with me that in developing countries, basically, the problem we have in developing countries is not because they don't have the money. Developing countries, some, for example, like Nigeria, has money, in the real sense, even though we're not, making the best use of it, but the money is there, but the institutions are not working. The institutions are not there to check malfeasance, people that are not doing the right thing. So many people are not doing the right thing. So the money is there, but it goes into individual pockets because institutions are not there to check the activities. The money does not yield positive results. At the end of the day, it becomes detrimental to the society. It creates, income disequilibrium. The gap between the rich and the poor will be very high. So in the long run, it becomes a problem to the economy. Instead of an advantage, becomes works to the disadvantage of the system. So primarily, a working system should have working institutions. For a system to work, the institutions must be inclusive. there must be inclusive institutions, institutions that can drive productivity, institutions that can, motivate people to work, institutions where opportunities are available, institutions that will create the necessary balance for economic growth, where individuals will be motivated to put in their best to guarantee, their life, where life itself is dignified, where there is human dignity, and human beings have good self-esteem. Like one of the components of economic development is having good self-esteem, high self-esteem. That's what, as far as I'm concerned, that's what makes the difference between developed and developing nations. Individuals in developing countries don't have good self-esteem. Individuals in developing countries have good self-esteem. They work towards improving their lot, doing their best in the society, proud of their society, is do their best to improve the lot of the society. But in developing countries, there's this laxity of, anything goes. And when anything goes, there'll be institutional decay. Institutions will not work. And when institutions don't work, the rule of law will not work. There'll be no checks and balance. Everyone will do whatever he or she likes. And at the end of the day, what do you get? You get a downturn, an economy that does not work, an economy that is rather extractive instead of inclusive. So for an economy to be inclusive and have reasonable growth, that economy must have working institutions. So institutions are the major factors that play for good economic development. So many other factors can be put in place, so it can be taken care of. But institutional factors are factors that are inherent in a system. They come from the moral, development. Human beings have to discipline themselves. Institutions grow from self-discipline. Individuals having a holistic approach, believing that this system must work and we must work to the benefit of the society. Making sure that your general interest of the society does overrides your self-interest. But societies that are propelled by self-interest, institutions don't work, because every human being in that society looks out to making sure that he gets everything for himself. And when you get everything for yourself, the society itself will suffer, because not every human being will have the same opportunity in the system. So what institutions are is providing, a level playing field for everyone to harness the opportunities available in the system. If you have the opportunity to provide good education, health, and every other social amenity to the people, you do it. And once the people have good education, have good health, they will work and produce. And when they produce, the society will earn income. And when the society earns income, the economy will work. So administrative and institutional problems plague every society. And what we're saying here is that it's a major problem of the big push theory. The big push theory did not consider administrative and institutional problems. Like we said, the big push theory was a proposal for Eastern European countries and Southeast European countries after the Second World War. And some of the basic features of developing countries that we see today, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, weren't there. They weren't there at that time. As a matter of fact, many countries in sub-Saharan Africa were not there when the big push theory was proposed by Rosenstein-Roeder. So you can see that some of the proposals and recommendations of the big push theory are not feasible in present-day sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asian countries and stuff like that. It probably would have been feasible in Eastern Europe at that time, because after the Second World War, a couple of Eastern European countries were dilapidated, so we're working towards trying to improve their lot. But as it is today, you can't develop any country in sub-Saharan Africa using the balanced growth theory, or the big push theory that was, proposed by Rosenstein and all that. So the sixth criticism there is, hello, I hope you guys are listening. Hello,
yes,
can someone just, okay, oh, great, thank you. So, so it will not seem as if I'm talking to myself. Okay. All right. So the sixth one there, that the big push is not a historical fact. Obviously, if from all indication, if you look at the big push theory, in a balanced growth model, it's basically, it does not have any historical fact behind it. Most countries of the world, even the developed world of Western European countries and the United States and Canada, for example, they never had development in the manner of balanced growth. In my study of American economic history, I've never seen a situation where all the sector, the is someone talking? I can hear. Okay, please, you can mute, or if you want to ask a question, please just let me know so you can talk. Am I too fast? Can someone tell me if I'm too fast or too slow?
No, sir. You are not.
Okay. Thank you. So, what we're saying in essence is that the big push theory of Rosenstein never had any historical fact behind it. The countries of Western Europe and North America, as a matter of fact, never had any balanced, or big push growth, so to speak. What they had was a systematic progression, a systematic progression in sectoral growth, and this, like we said, institutional growth and development. For first of all, fine-tuning their morals, how they behave and how they relate to themselves. They now started developing, development in Western societies, as much as I've read and know, it wasn't a one-day thing. It wasn't holistic. It wasn't something that came from the blues. It was something that grew, with time. First of all, what they did in Western civilization was to fine-tune their way of life, making sure the human beings behave well. So from there, they were able to develop a system that works, in the sense that, if you do the right thing with the right intention, you get good results. So doing the right thing is basically what drives an economy. If everyone does the right thing, the system will be favorable for people to operate in. It's not going to be an all-comers affair. So that is basically what Western societies did. They never, had a time where they said, okay, let us push every sector at the same time. It never happened. So there is no historical fact behind the big push theory. Like I said, the big push theory was like a recommendation that, look, okay, these Eastern European countries or Southeast European countries, let us advise them to invest heavily in all the industries, and at the same time, let us see if they can be productive at the same time. No, which really, like we have seen, sounds very utopian. Because in Western civilization, if you read Western economic history, you will see that development in Western societies, followed a very reasonable pattern. First of all, they try to develop, a system where people have good moral, knowing how to relate to themselves very well. From having good relationship amongst themselves, they developed a system of education where people will learn and put what they have learned in practice. And today, what we're seeing is a system where there's a lot of transfer payment, a welfare state, a system where government takes reasonable, part in making sure that the human being survives and succeeds. But what we see in developing countries, for example, in Nigeria, is that the system cares less about its citizens. The system does not really pay much attention to the welfare of its citizens. Unlike what you see in developed systems. Developed systems pay more attention to their citizens than underdeveloped countries. Underdeveloped countries, they approach things from a perspective that does not pay attention to shared prosperity. They look at things from an extractive perspective, a perspective where the goal is not to, make the society better, but the individual, which is wrong, which is wrong. So the big push theory never had any historical fact in the first instance. So there was no sound example, so to speak, of a country that, or countries rather, that were propelled by the big push theory, under a balanced system of growth. So the big push theory is heavily criticized, and some of the criticisms is what gave rise to the other aspects of thinking. But before we look into such aspects, we also have to look at the other side of the balanced growth theory, which was proposed by Ragnar Knox. Ragnar Knox was one of those early proponents of the balanced growth theory. He bought the idea, but his idea was a lot more different from Rosenstein Roden. He was a little bit more, oriented to the normal trajectory of economic development as we know it. He emphasized more on investment in agriculture and the manufacturing sectors. Like we said earlier, for you to push a developing society from, backwardness to economic development, you must first of all look at the agricultural aspect, because a society that cannot feed itself cannot really grow. I mean, for goodness sake, if you are not well fed, how will you concentrate? How will you do your best? Countries like the United States that we see today that are developed and other developed countries, they've arrested their problems of, food. They definitely don't have much food problems. In the United States, for example, you can go to food banks, go to some places that are run by non-governmental organization, and you get food for free. So food is no longer a major issue, and it's really affordable. Food is really affordable. It's not something that is special, so to speak. So what Knox is saying is that for you to have balanced growth, you must invest, you know, simultaneously, not in all sectors, but in two major sectors, agricultural and manufacturing sector. The agricultural and manufacturing sector too, if you look at it in the real sense of it, for it's also all encompassing in the real sense, because what you produce from the agricultural sector will feed into the manufacturing sector. But a society where you harness these two sectors very well is almost becoming like the balanced growth society, balanced growth theory, because once you harness the agricultural sector, it requires a lot of inputs for you to, feed that into the manufacturing sector, and for the manufacturing sector to produce at its optimum. Definitely, all other basic sectors will be in place. So, it's the Knox theory. You've given a very deep thinking or deep thought, as the case may be, you will find that it's also embracing a balanced growth idea, and balanced in the sense that is all encompassing. It's all encompassing. So what Knox is saying is that you you need to invest simultaneously in agriculture and manufacturing sector for you to promote economic growth in developing countries. That makes sense, obviously. That makes sense. That's part of what we've been arguing. You know, for you to promote growth and development in any developing country, you must also look at you know, agricultural development. Because if your agricultural sector is weak, obviously there is no how you can get your manufacturing sector, working at its optimum. Because the agricultural sector will provide the necessary resources for the manufacturing sector to work with. And when the manufacturing sector is like a cycle, the manufacturing sector is working, and for the manufacturing sector to work as well, it must harness all the you know proceeds from the other sectors as well. So Knox also argues that the small size of markets in developing countries, impede economic growth and creates a vicious cycle of poverty, which is true. Obviously, when there is the small size of market, because when you look at markets in some perspective, it's not really about population. That's what some people misunderstand in economics. Even though in the long run, population is a factor, but in the real sense of it, you know, the market basically is about purchasing power. The strength, the economic strength of this system, not much of its population. Because you have a population of very poor people, as a matter of fact, it might not, equate. For example, the United States is not the most populous nation on earth, but it starts out as one of the richest nations on earth. So, is markets basically, you know, it's not synonymous with population, so to speak, you know. But the bigger the market in terms of when all the necessary factors are in place and when the society is well empowered, it's advantageous. It's an advantage. But size of markets, that the market is small size, you know, does not necessarily mean that the population is few. Because if you look at Nigeria, for example, the Nigerian population is over 200 million. But in the world, our market is small. We have a very small size of market because even though we have the population, but because the economy is weak, the size of the market is weak as well. So, you know, the size of the market being weak will definitely impede economic growth. Because if the market is small, demand will be low. Demand will be low because people will not have the purchasing power. So that's what Knox is saying. Small markets, low purchasing power. Low purchasing power, be a cycle. If you produce in such economy, people will not buy, or people will have less of money to buy, and they don't have strong purchasing power. What do you get in the long run? Productivity will be low. If you mistakenly produce there, you sometimes too you can produce in small markets and export to bigger markets. That is when you're producing at low cost. But unfortunately, there's a major problem in developing countries because of high cost of production, high cost of production in developing countries because of lack of infrastructure. You can't produce because of lack of infrastructure. You can't produce at minimum cost. You can never produce at minimum cost because they lack the basic infrastructure. Why China is what it is today in the world is because China produces at low cost. So they produce at competitive cost. The price of production in China is low. They have the population, so labor is cheap in the real sense compared to places like the United States. So that is why most American companies go to China to invest. And when they produce in China, they export it back to the United States because it's cheaper to produce in China than in the United States. So what American companies do, they concentrate on those areas where they have high comparative advantage, like high tech, aeronautics and all whatnot. Then for consumer goods, they go to China to produce consumer goods. So those consumer goods, they know when they produce in China, they bring it to their cost at a lower cost. They bring it to the United States to sell. But for those high technology products that they know, they cannot, obviously requires high technology and, they cannot really export, go outside to produce such. They produce those ones in the United States and now export to countries where they will make more money. So at the end of the day, if the market is not, if the market is small, obviously it will impede growth. And what do you get at the end of the day? If you're not producing, what do you get? You definitely have poverty because your income is a function of the productivity of the economy. And the productivity is low, people earn low income. And when people earn low income, they save less. And when they don't save, the economy will not have enough for investment. So it's a cycle. That cycle continues, and poverty, become a poverty-stricken economy. And at the end of the day, what do you get? You get people living in abject poverty and economic downturn. Instead of economic growth, you're getting recession. You know, so that's what you see in developing countries. So what Knox is saying that because of the size of the market in developing countries, economic, vicious cycle of poverty is created, low demand and low productivity. So another aspect of it is another aspect of Knox's theory of balanced growth is that the substantial synchronized application of capital in various industries will raise the level of economic efficiency and promote economic growth. When you invest, what he's saying here is that if synchronously you invest huge capital in various industries, obviously economic efficiency and economic growth will be gingered. But the argument is this: if an economy is not productive in the first instance, because these theories are basically for developing countries, and more or less underdeveloped countries. If an economy is not producing at optimum capacity, where will you get the investment from? That's another question. To invest, to generate, invest in sectors, where would the capital come from? Capital outlay will be very low if an economy is not producing, if an economy is not, you know, at its optimum, so to speak. So it's like a cycle. If there is no if the economy is not producing, there will be no investment. If there is no investment, there is no savings. If there is no savings, there is no economic growth. So, but Knox and his team at that time were saying that if there's substantial synchronized application of capital in various industries, it will raise the level of economic efficiency. That is true. That is true. That is obviously very true. Nobody is arguing about that. But if it's a development theory and you are looking at something that will that be good enough for developing countries, then if for a developing country to have the resources, to invest, synchronously in various sectors or in various sectors of the economy, I mean, you should know that that economy being productive is heading in the right direction. So, like we said earlier, some of these theories are basically utopia. Then the other aspect is the size of market and incentive to invest. Obviously, we've talked about that. The size of the market, if obviously, also encourages investment. If there is, if market is large, it encourages people to invest. For example, many companies come to the United States to to invest, to build their plants, because the market is there. For example, Toyota, all these Japanese auto manufacturers, they all manufacture their state-of-the-art vehicles in the United States because that's where the market is. That's where the market is. That's where people have the purchasing power. That's where people have the money to buy those vehicles. So they go there, they set up plants, they set up their plants and make the money there. Then from there, they can also export to some other countries. But the base, where the market is where they establish, you know, where they invest. You know, even in primary and in elementary economics, we know that um, one of the major factors for location of industries is nearness to raw material and market and stuff like that. So these are basic factors that needs to be appreciated in economic growth. You know. So Knox theory is saying that the size of market and the incent has something to do with the incentive to invest. Because obviously, if the market is you know, promising, there will be high scale investment. For example, the automobile manufacturer who sets up plants where there's high demand and purchasing power. That is obviously true. So let's see what's next. So in that case, talks about market size. It's a very important aspect of economic growth and development because when the market is not there, what are we talking about? Economic growth is basically about increasing the balance sheet of a country, GDP growth and stuff like that. So if a country is not earning money, so to speak, I mean obviously there'll be no growth. You know, what are we quantifying here? We're looking at monetary terms. Looking at monetary terms, how much money does a country have? That's basically what economic growth is. Reducing every other thing in the system to monetary terms. So you know, the determinants of market size, so to speak, the size of the market, like we said earlier, it's not about population. Population is also a factor, actually, like you see, is number 2 on our slide, but that's more or less a secondary factor in this sense. You know, the money supply is, somebody has a question. Okay, let me just pause here for a while and take one or two questions from any of you. Let's pause here before we go into this. Can I take one or two questions from my friends in the class? Hello? Hello?
No questions.
Okay, no questions?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay. All right, let me
Ask
continue talking.
questions.
It's not easy for one to be talking to himself. So no problem. Okay, you have, eh? Do you have question? Hello? Did someone say he has question?
No questions, sir.
Okay, good. No problem. Okay, thank you. No problem. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so like you said, the market size is a very important aspect of determining the level of the economy because, like you said, the market size that Knox and his group and his colleagues are talking about obviously is very important. So the money supply is one of the determinants, so to speak. A society or is an economic system that has reasonable supply of money. Obviously you create high income. Because when you say that a society is a high income society, like the advanced societies are high income societies. They are societies where people earn very high income, even though in the long run it might create some inflationary because the standard of living is high. People will tend to spend more for to purchase goods and get the available services. Life obviously becomes expensive, but it is expensive in the sense that the standard is high. Some expensive societies are because they have reasonable amount of quantity of money in circulation. And when you look at it from that perspective, you see that working societies where investment is high obviously have high level of money supply. For example, in a place like Tokyo, Japan, the single apartment is somehow in the neighborhood. There are some single apartments that cost in the neighborhood of $5,000 to $10,000. The same thing is applicable to New York City, for example. These are high income societies, and the standard of living is very high. If you are living in a place like New York and you pay $5,000 every month for an apartment, maybe a one-bedroom apartment, the same one-bedroom apartment may be, you know, 1,500 or $2,000 in Lynchburg, Virginia, or somewhere in the East Coast like Delaware or Wilmington, Delaware, or Maryland. So it's a function of the society and environment you find yourself. So money supply is a major determinant of the market, of market size in any economy. An economy that has reasonable supply or adequate supply of money, obviously, will have high income, given that all the factors of production are in place, given that infrastructure, there are no infrastructural deficiencies, because if there are infrastructural deficiencies, obviously, it will not, the money supply obviously will not, the real value of that money will go down, but, the real value of money being high, as in relation to the nominal value is basically a function of, standard of living. Societies that have high standard of living definitely are productive societies. They are productive societies. In such societies where they pay like $5,000 a month for rent for a single apartment, the earning capacity too is very high. In such society, probably earn like $20,000 or $15,000 every month, or $10,000 a month, as the case may be. So it's basically a function of where you find yourself. So money supply is a major determinant of market size and stuff like that. And the population, like we said, this also determines the size of the market. But population also is a function of uh, 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 how productive or how how skilled the population is, or how, obviously it's not because the population is heavy, then the population is plagued by poverty-stricken individuals, or the population has a very high number of poverty-stricken individuals. That population cannot be compared to a society that has high income individuals in the majority. So that's exactly what we're saying. So population is a major factor, but it's a function of the income capacity of the citizen, people living in society. We also look at geographical area. Geographical area is a function of market size, because if the area is not favorable, to the market, obviously, it will be out of place. It will not make much sense for people to invest in that area. It has to be favorable, and like we say in military economics, one of the factors of location of industries is nearness to raw material. So you must look at geographical location if you're trying to determine factors that will kind of improve the size of the market. So that's another one: export promotion for manufactured goods. When every society, obviously, what makes a society grow is your ability to export more than you import. Any society that does not export more than it imports, obviously, be running a negative balance sheet. And is basic. You cannot earn less, or sorry, if you're exporting less and importing more, you're definitely earning less, because you're spending virtually all your earnings for sorry, to import. So this is basically one of the major problems of developing countries like Nigeria, where the society imports more and export less. Nigeria, for example, to a large extent, is like a monoproduct economy where our basic export is petroleum products. Fortunately for us in recent times, our foreign remittances is now accounting reasonably well for, because of our syndrome to travel out of place of abode because of the economic situation. So that is basically what is making so many Nigerians survive. Many Nigerian families now are living on foreign remittances from their relatives abroad. Ordinarily, it would have been very burdensome for this economy to move. But because of the situation we find ourselves, a lot of families have relatives abroad. So the system is not surviving on foreign remittances. Well, it has this stage we are in economic development is not. Um, I'm not going to say it's not new to the world. Let me put it that way. There have been countries like India, found themselves in the situation we are right now in the 60s. Even Philippines still find themselves in that situation, but not as bad as we are anyway, and as bad as Nigeria is. But it is something that it has its own advantages and disadvantages. I'm not saying making a mess of the economy is good. God forbid, I can't say that. That the economy is in a mess is something that is out of place. But generally, what we're saying is, individuals leaving the shores of their countries, going to other countries to study, learn new things, and come back home, or stay there to work, generate resources, and engage in sending money back home through foreign remittances, is something that has been on for quite a while, and has really propelled the development of some countries in the world, even China that we see today, even Japan, from my personal experience. I remember in the 70s, in the 80s, in the United States, you see a couple of Japanese kids in American universities. But today, you don't see them anymore. You don't see them. They don't have any reason to be there because, they have a country that is very prosperous, and they don't have any business staying in the United States. If you see them in the United States, they are, you know, operating at the highest level of society. So that's exactly what I'm saying. You know, India, for example, at the time in the 80s, 90s, or thereabout, found themselves in a situation where Nigeria, even in the 60s, that had similar problem where a lot of them had to, go out of the shores of their country to acquire knowledge, to work, and that's why you see so many of them all over the world today. You know, the same thing is applicable to so many South American countries. So it's not out of place for people to leave their shores, go to other countries to learn. But that doesn't mean that you know, uh, 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 um, it doesn't really mean that the economy has to be bad for people to move. The economy doesn't have to be so bad for people to move because for people to, but something has to spur that movement that will, generate the kind of foreign remittances that we're seeing in Nigeria today. Foreign remittances is a major aspect of what is promoting, the little we're seeing in Nigeria, the individual survival that we're seeing in Nigeria today is basically on foreign remittances. Because if you look at it, our earning capacity is very low. How much is the minimum wage in Nigeria? The average Nigerian, the minimum wage here is roughly less than, not even up to $50. If the minimum wage is less than $50, I mean, tell me how someone can survive with less than $50 in a month, less than $50 in a month. So that is really something that is very, very dangerous. But with the remittances, most of the relatives or people that have friends and family outside the shores, they work, they bring back money home, support their families, and that will help to create some level of prosperity in such in those homes. So that's exactly where we find ourselves today. So what I will I will sum it up in the sense that our export promotion in Nigeria is no longer for manufactured goods. We are now exporting individuals for to develop countries to get knowledge and earn income. But in any case, the export promotion for manufactured goods increases market size. That's what we're saying. When you promote the production of manufactured goods, you definitely export more. And when you export more, you get more revenue in return. And that can help to increase, that obviously increases the size of the market and at the same time gingers economic growth. Uh, Another aspect, number 5 here, is talking about the macroeconomic paradox. We are increasing productivity in the agricultural sector for raw material, also ginger increasing productivity in the manufacturing sector. That is true. Like we've been hammering on that. That's something that is very, very positive. You know, in this part of the world, we have recently paid very less attention to agricultural productivity. If you read economic tests here in Nigeria, for example, you will see that in the early days, before the advent of petroleum products, in the early days of our, in the 60s, so to speak, the we had the palm oil in the southeast, we had the granite pyramid in the north, and we had the cocoa in the west. You, at that time, Nigeria was the value of the Nigerian currency, so to speak, was strong, even though we were using the pounds, but the Nigerian pound was very strong. Even in the 70s, after the naira was introduced, the naira was very, very strong because we had a working system. We had a system that was productive. We had cotton. We had, in the north, uh, um, um, textile mills in the north. Even in Nigeria, even in Lagos, there were textile mills in Lagos, in Aba, all those areas. Productivity was very high. We had Dunlop, we had all those manufacturing companies in Nigeria. Then the value of Naira was very, very strong. Naira was, as at the early 70s, Naira was, even up to 1978 or thereabout, Naira was changing at, 50 something kobo to, a pound, sorry, to a dollar, was almost at par with the pound, with the British pound. So this was because productivity was very high and there was more emphasis on the agricultural sector. We had the palm oil in the east, we had the cocoa in the west, still functioning, still selling, still producing, and the granite pyramids in the north still functioning, still producing and feeding the manufacturing sector. So everything was in place, and people were more, morally, the moral standing of individuals, was a lot more reasonable, unlike what we see today. So obviously, what we saw then in Nigeria was, a sound system, a sound economy that was stable. Human beings who schools, educational finance was at its optimum. You know, cost of living was reasonable and affordable. You know, people could get basic, means of livelihood at the right time. And everything was going on smoothly to the benefit of the society. But unfortunately, with uh, 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 time going and what we're seeing today is that we find ourselves in a society where there is little or no you know, emphasis on emphasis on productivity, and everyone is campering for the little resource, the little money that comes from the federal allocation, you know, federation account, as the case may be. Go there, share the money, go home and sit down and watch, wait for the next month. So, I mean, no economy grows like that. That is obviously out of place. And that is why, it's not surprising that we're where we are today in the world. So the Nigerian economy has seen very dangerous and negative downturn, and that is, very, very terrible, so to speak. So let us look at some of the criticisms of Knox balanced growth theory. The balanced growth theory of Knox, like, remember what we looked at was market size. We're still on Knox proposal. So we just picked market size from his proposition and examined what factors that determines the size of the market. So we're looking at some of the criticisms of the balanced growth theory as proposed by Knox. One of the criticisms that the balanced growth theory is beyond the capacity of underdeveloped countries. So Hirschman argued that developing countries lack the human and financial resources to steer a simultaneous growth in the various sectors of the economy. And I think you would agree with me on that based on our discussion so far, that balanced growth is not a feasible theory of development for developing countries. That's what Hirschman and others are saying. And you agree with me that that is true. So in 1958, Albert Hirschman, proposed an unbalanced growth theory, which looks at the investment in specific sectors for social capital and direct productive activities. So what he looked at is that there's this growth, that when you invest in social capital and direct productive activity, there's the pattern of growth that you get in the economy. And what Fishman and his fellow people that are proposing the unbalanced theory, and what they're looking at is that you have to invest in specific sectors. When you invest in specific sectors or strategic sectors, so to speak, those strategic sectors can now ginger growth and development in other sectors. That is true to a large extent. But as we all know, I mean, the economy is holistic. We cannot stop an aspect of the economy and invest in other aspects while we're waiting for it to work that way. But in the real sense of it, the unbalanced growth theory is not saying stop other sectors. What it's saying is that pump money or pump investment into a particular sector and use that sector as when that sector starts creating its resources, then the resources or what you get from that sector can be used to propel other sectors. For example, you can't produce automobile or maybe good railroad system or anything that requires steel without having a steel factory. That is one. You must invest in a steel plant for you to have companies that manufacture automobile. If you don't have a steel plant in your country, you will definitely either import completely knocked down parts, or you are importing the automobile, as fully manufactured product. So if you want to produce anything, you must invest in those specific sectors that will ginger the productivity of those goods. So that's what the unbalanced growth theory is all about. So that given a limited amount of investment resources, there are substitution choices, and postponement choices. The idea there is this: for you to operate the unbalanced growth theory, you must also know those sectors that you can use, to substitute each other. If this sector is not working, what other sector can produce things that I need for this sector to work. Also know those sectors that you need to put on the hold while some other sectors will be active. So these are, things that requires a lot of good thinking and resolving this question, of the question of priority on comparative appraisal becomes a major, problem of the unbalanced growth theory. So Hirschman, also had his criticisms. There are criticisms of his model. One of them is that did not pay attention to optimum degree of imbalance because obviously there's an imbalance in the society. You cannot really treat any aspect of the society, any part of the economy in isolation. No part of the economy is in isolation. You can't treat any aspect in isolation. All the aspects of the economy are like, they're holistic. They all work side by side, and one must work with the other. So that's just what it is. So you must not treat the any aspect of the economy in isolation. And also the criticism is that when you start investing in a particular sector, heavily in a particular sector, you create inflationary pressures and which will affect the economy. And at the end of the day, you know, people will have so much money or so much money that income that they will not know have anything to buy with it, which would cause inflation. So another thing is the factor immobility. When you hold some sectors down, you know, the factors of production will not be fully mobilized. They will be kind of dormant. So when the factor is dormant, it becomes very difficult for the economy to grow. When there is a factor immobility, you are holding down one sector so that another sector will grow. It's just like saying, for you know, obviously you guys understand what I'm saying. When you hold down one factor and one sector rather, with the hope that another sector will grow, it becomes difficult in the long run because that sector that was held down obviously will pull down the other sectors. So it's holistic. An economy is like a human being. If one part of your body is not functioning well, other parts will not function. That's how an economy is. If one aspect of the economy or one sector of the economy is not functioning well, obviously the other sectors will not function. Because, for example, if you invest so much in productivity and the educational sector is weak, obviously you will not have enough manpower to manage that, manage the productive sector. So you must try as much as possible to balance up and carry every other sector along. So that's basically what makes it. And that is why, in the long run, like I said, the balanced growth model, is more relevant in advanced societies. The advanced growth or the unbalanced growth model can be partly relevant in some societies, developing countries, but it will not yield optimum result. It will not yield optimal result. I will also advise you guys to look into some text and see if you can, look at some of the analytical aspects of the Hirschman growth model. The Hirschman growth model has some analytic aspects which we cannot, look into here, but along the line, you see that that's basically on the relationship between social capital and direct productive activities. That's a graphical representation on that, which didn't look at here, but I implore you to look into it, even though we're not going to be examining on that. So please just look into it at your time and try to understand how the Hirschman growth model looks at the relationship between social capital and direct productive activities. So factor immobility, like we said, when you hold one down, demobilizes that particular sector and the factors of production in that sector will be diminished. So lastly, we say that the Hirschman growth model, ignores institutional factors. like we said, like we have been able to understand in our discussion that institutional factors actually is what makes the difference. Economic development is not, something that it's not it's not a one-off thing that you can't develop a system that institutions don't work. There is no basic formula that can be applied in developing a system. You know, every developed nation, for example, what I've seen in my studies and research and American citizens and stuff like that is that a country develops by operating working institutions. Working institutions. A country that has extractive institutions will not develop. Will never develop. I don't care how much money you pump into that system. It will go into private hands because the institutions are extractive. But when countries operate working and inclusive institutions that are geared towards shared prosperity, that country develops. That country will harness all these God-given resources and develop, and develop. So what makes development primarily the way we see it today in the world is institution, and institutions. That's it. Once institutions are in place, that country will definitely get the best out of whatever is available in that society. It's only institutions that makes a society two different society. It makes a society different from the other, irrespective of how much capital, how much money. If you pump money into an institution, into a society that has no working institution, that society will not work. But if you pump money into a society or investment, put it that way, if you pump investment into a society with working institutions, that society will be able to harness those investments properly and develop and make reasonable progress. So I'm going to send this slide to Dr. Wolabi to pass it across to the students, and like I said, I wish you all the best, and I'm open to questions. So let me take one or two questions before we come to the end of the class. Hello?
Well, yes, sir.
Yes, please.
Oh, welcome, sir. His name is.
Yeah, I'm listening.
Oh, thank you so much.
Okay.
Is
that happiness?
Yes, it is, sir.
Okay, please, just a second, please. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so I'm listening, please. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. And I'll say thank you for the class. Impactful. I wanted to ask a question when you mentioned that society is trying to live in a productive society. I think I'm question. Can you hear me, sir? Oh my God.
Sorry, I can hear you, but it's not very clear. I'm not hearing you very well. Can you can you go to the chat and type it so I can let's go to the chat box, please. You can type it.
Okay. There. How is it now?
Yeah, it's very clear. I can hear you. Very, very clear, yes.
Okay, so you said that societies with high standard of growth are
Yes.
productive societies. Does that
Yes.
hold in places with should I say some instances of dualism? For instance, in underdeveloped countries or developing countries like Nigeria, some areas seem
Yes.
to have experienced higher sort of growth compared to other areas. Would you say that those areas are productive? Like
That's it.
to
Yes, go ahead.
add more
Yeah, go
context.
ahead.
Are you speaking, sir? How am I not hearing you?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
My
Then
God.
I can hear. I'm listening. Go ahead.
I can't hear you.
Okay, are you done with your question?
Mute yourself. Can you reduce the volume? I can't hear you. Excuse me. Hello?
Are you done?
Oh, I can hear you now.
Okay, can you hear me? Are you
Yes,
done?
sir.
Are you done? Okay, good. If I got you right, you said in societies like Nigeria, where you have, kind of, let me use the word cities where there are people earn more high income and rural areas, let's say urban areas where people earn high income and rural areas where people earn low income. Is that what you're saying?
No. Two things here. One, are societies with higher standard of living really productive societies? One, two.
Okay, good.
What would you classify as a productive society? Would you say just because the area has a higher living standard? So that's why I brought in the duality situation of Nigeria, where some places like Lekki and VI seem to be so posh and luxe. So would you say that those areas are productive compared to those areas that should I say shabby?
Okay, I got you. You're right. Okay, when we say productive societies have high income, we're looking at the country's, net income in terms of GDP. We're looking at in terms of GDP. We're not looking at the society in terms of, locations in the society, like, rural and urban areas. We're looking at the country. Yes, we're looking at the country holistically as a country. As a matter of fact, in economics, we do not specifically, consider, country differences. We don't, within the country per se. Is what we look at in general is the level of GDP of the country. How much does the per capita income in the country reflect? So when we say a country is a high income society, that is a society with very high GDP, very high GDP per capita. Exactly. But coming to your question about rural and urban, in urban areas where people have, industries, so to speak, where people have government presence, where people go to work and everything, obviously that's where they earn income. And such areas could be said to be places where people earn income. And if you look at the income statistics of those areas, obviously it will be higher than the rural areas where people are less productive. So, exactly. But generally, when we talk about productive economy, we're looking at the GDP per capita of that country. And we're also looking, when we say high income societies, we're looking at the GDP per capita of that country. We're not looking at the individual. We're not looking at individual differences in the society.
Okay. So, but higher GDP per capita also translates.
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. No worries. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, no problem. I appreciate your question. Thank you. Yeah. If you guys have any further question, you can shoot me an email. Let me put my email address on the chat box, so you can shoot me an email. So you can shoot me an email on the chat box. Right. So I wish you all the best, and we hope to see you some other time. Thank you very much.
Yes, sure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have a class after now, so they are leaving for that class.
Okay. Thank you very
but
much.
I will meet you tomorrow at 10 for the PhD class.
Exactly, for the PhD class. You're right. Thank you, Dr.
So you use the other. So you use the link that we used last week.
The other link. Yes. Okay. Okay. There. Thank you. Have a nice
thank you so
day.
much, sir. You too, sir.
You're welcome. Okay. There.
Yes, sir. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.